All right. Today we have with us director Ben Strang, director Tari Wariebi, director Ijaaz Noohu, director Elle Callahan,
and we have director David Goldsmith, director Sabrina Lassegue, and finally director Holben. And this is a cinematography for actors class, our directors roundtable, specifically to apply the technical of performance and directing as it pertains to emotions. So we're excited to dive in with everyone today. We have a range of directing styles represented, and we have a lot of fun questions to get through. So let's open it up. So hardest question to start with, which we thought would be easy, but then now we're realizing is hard. But let's see who has an answer for us. What film have you seen that most aligns with your directing style? And whoever has first answer.
Take it away, Jay.
God damn, that was a lot of pressure. That was a lot.
So we're not all going to say that. Great.
It's a really tough question, but I would have to say somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but also not, somewhere between E.T. and Seven.
Okay.
Yeah, almost the same movie.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
Anything
gamut.
specific about that you're like, it's E.T. or it's Seven?
Spielberg is a huge influence for me. I love the sensibility. I love the emotionality. I love the touch of being in the mindset of the characters and his skills of storytelling. But I also love the darker side of David Fincher and the way that he handles visual storytelling. So both of those really speak to me.
Great. Anyone else? Thoughts?
Oh, Ben, you threw that at me.
I'll
now.
just
Come on.
I'll just be a jerk, and I gotta just go with two as well. Maybe three. I'll do two.
Yeah.
Like the one that comes to mind, and just in terms of directors that speak to me a lot, is David Lean. Dr. Zhivago and Lawrence were like just the two most formative movies for me. And I think like early on in my directing career, I was focusing a lot more on scripted than I do now. I lean a lot more doc now, but Lean gives me that sort of documentary realism in the like static, raw, let everything live in the frame kind of an experience, which is something we like really don't see that much anymore. So that really speaks to me, and I think a big part of my style as well involves shooting outdoors and those films that really like make the expansive landscape and the interaction between grandiosity and intimacy like really like flavorful on camera. That really speaks to me. I'll just leave it at one. I'll just leave it there. David Lean.
That's great.
We're just going in this order.
Go for it. I think we've started it
Wow.
all.
Be put on the spot is what.
I think I'm just going to, you know what? I'll just do this. Any film Bong Joon-ho has made probably aligns. I think his storytelling is really robust, and the specificity of character and how that marries with like story and craft. So I never feel his directing, but I know he's directing and is kind of carrying the story forward. So I think that kind of aligns with my style. So
I would say someone like Jacques Audiard, who I'm probably butchering his name,
Jacques Audiard.
with like The Beat That My Heart Skipped or A Prophet, which I think like especially I kind of like fell into like the music video world on accident, and I think like the sensibility I try to bring to that is like narrative but also expressive, or sorry, like realism and also like expressive storytelling, and I think he gets at something like just like sublime that I'm always chasing, and I think that's that mix of like the kind of camera work that's like somehow like not planned but incredibly intentional, and yeah, that feels like the horizon I'm always going after.
Amazing. Elle.
The Thing.
Oh, hell yeah.
My movies are very atmospheric. They usually are set in one main location that involves a group of people, and it quickly devolves, and there's usually a monster. I think that film really slowly builds on your fear, and that's what my films do, or I intend to do with them.
Amazing. That's
Good
fun.
answer.
I love The Thing. That's a good one.
I would say for me, not so much subject matter, but style-wise, probably Glengarry Glen Ross. I'm really motivated by the ensemble. I
I think as an audience member, all my work always comes from an audience member perspective. I love being immersed in a moment, and I love being a part of a moment that happened long before I got there. So I really love what Mamet does with his writing style, and I think Glengarry Glen Ross is not the subject matter of my work, but absolutely I love that style because I'm more of a comedic guy, and I love bringing in that human sort of drama into comedy, which just reinforces the comedy from my perspective. So I would say Glengarry Glen Ross.
Fun. Sabrina.
I'm going with two as well.
Okay.
First would be Hook. Spielberg. For me, it's the timelessness in childhood, and that's a big part of all my films is, exploring that inner child, and I love being within a kid's brain. And then the second would be Test Pattern, Shatara Michelle Ford. I'm huge on films that raise awareness on topics like sexual assault and sex trafficking. And getting to see that film in recent years come to light and how much passion she put into that film really inspires me, and those are the kind of stories I want to tell and touch on those subjects.
Beautiful. Wow. I love this. Like I said, I think we have so many different styles represented, and it's really cool to kind of establish it with, even if people haven't seen everyone's individual work here who will be watching, they've probably seen a lot of those films. And so that's awesome. I'm glad we could open up with
It's
that.
a super
Thank you so
hard
much.
question because I'm sure
Yeah.
all of us here have
Yeah.
a beat from a movie
Yeah.
Sure.
that could really
Oh,
be
yeah.
that spark.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? For
Yeah.
me, it's Spielberg. It's
Yeah,
Jaws.
it's like,
When he and his son have a silent exchange of facial expressions that would be cut out of any modern movie today. There wouldn't be enough time for it.
Mhm.
But that, for me, is like, wow.
This one?
Beautiful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm sure we all have that moment of
Yeah.
that thing, but to encapsulate it into one thing is very hard. I mean,
It's kind of funny you mentioned that because like I think so many points of inspiration are things that would be cut nowadays because they're subtle, and like subtlety is sort of like where inspired moments live, and like today everything's so
Yeah.
sliced across the top.
100%. Yeah, I think starting with you was great because Spielberg opened. Once you said Spielberg, I was like, oh, I think like contemporary now. I was like, oh yeah, Bong Joon-ho, offspring of Spielberg, his work, same thing, but very specific. And I was like, all right, cool.
You talk about subtle.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Beautiful stuff.
absolutely.
That was a fascinating question.
It's a fun one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are we done?
Yeah, I feel like we did it.
it.
feel like-
Nailed it.
Do you want to take us off? a second?
Yeah.
It's a fun one. I
Yeah.
think.
Okay, so
From an actor perspective.
we
yeah.
are going to start asking some technical questions. I want to know if, kind of across the board, you feel like there's a note that you're continually giving to actors, kind of no matter who you're working with, you just know you're going to have to give it.
It really depends.
Yeah.
Specifically a technical note?
Depends.
Like, is it, is it a technical note or like a?
We could
Speci-
start it off.
I have an
way.
answer. I have an answer.
Either way.
Yeah.
Faster.
Faster.
Yeah, it's one of those frustrating things. It's an actor's hardest job is to deliver the work in a cadence and a rhythm
Yeah, you definitely.
that supports the moment
Yeah.
and not rush it. So you know the inclination is to take your time with it and feel the beats as an actor,
Yeah.
but as a filmmaker, you're trying to marry it between other performances and also what your cut is and where you're going.
Yeah.
So it's faster is a scary thing because it can really get horrendous quickly. But it's one of those things you want to give your actors that space to have their moment, but be somehow cognizant. You know, it's almost like the invisible mark on the floor.
That's interesting. It is something about metronome because I feel like when you think about first-time actors, I think they typically have like the worst metronome because they're a little bit more frantic, a lot more anxious. Like you kind of got to get them to slow down.
Mm-hmm.
But it is an interesting, and I think it speaks to you doing comedy because it is like it's like a metronome that you have for the film. And
Right.
yes, you're gonna have coverage you need to cut, but it is the words getting out in a particular way to help land the joke. So when you that is pacing, some form of metronome is probably a continual kind of note, which usually I never tell an actor to go faster or slower. I just tweak the urgency or the objective of whatever they're doing
Yeah.
in hopes that they can
Yeah.
kind of speed forward or slow down.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and like I do horror, and I'm always like slow down,
Mhm.
like
Sure.
just slow,
Right.
look for a long time, like because a lot of the builds to my scares are built in their
Mhm.
reactions
Sure.
or the anticipation of something happening, and I feel like I'm always telling them to take like twice, 3 times as long as they think they need to react to something.
Interesting.
Because so much of the scares are also built in the edit,
Mhm.
and I want more room to play there. And I find that the actors that I like working with understand that their long looks aren't going to be that long. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But yeah, I think timing is a big one.
Mhm.
Another one for me is not to have them like talk over the other actor, because then I can't change the conversation at all. If I want to cut something together differently in the edit, if they're talking over each other, then that part of the conversation is
Sure.
lost, and I can't build it a different way.
That can get scary though too, because the naturality of a conversation is that overlap that
Mhm.
Spielberg is brilliant at. So it's interesting. A lot of what Spielberg's able to accomplish, I think, is done in the cut for
Mhm.
sure.
Yeah.
But it also happens organically in the moment, which is that's really the art form of capturing that dialogue.
But I think,
Yeah.
I mean, that's interesting. I've never had that experience. And I think and I don't know, I'm not familiar with the work, but I imagine that's probably a mixture of like cast, or like the professional, like the tier of actors too, because I think good actors typically are good listeners, so they're finding moments. Like I've
Mhm.
never found myself in a place where I'm like, oh, they're talking over each other, because typically, good actors are listening and knowing. And
But I would
picking up
imagine
on
in a
it.
frantic
Yeah,
situation.
but
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
what I'm, like,
It's
thinking
usually when
about.
they're about to be killed.
Yeah.
So. And in their defense, I would also be talking
Yeah,
if I
for
was
sure,
about to
for
die.
sure.
So.
Yeah.
I feel like there's like an interesting shift in how notes for actors changes when you're trying to give notes to like improve a performance versus to like steer it left or right. When you
Yeah.
like when performances show up and they're already up to par, like even in rehearsal, and you're just like, okay, now we have to sort of maneuver this. Like for me, the thing, it's not like a note that I give verbally, but like the thing I'm always pushing for, especially given that like my work leans a lot more documentary, and so work with talent is a lot of the times like they are the writers in a lot of ways, and so even in a lot of docs things are scripted and there are beats you're going to get, and there are scenes that you're already aware of how it's going to play out, so there is sort of narrative directing in it, but like the thing that I'm trying to have happen is for people to explore and to just like calm down, just like forget about everybody else and just like live in the moment and like let what you want to do inform where the camera wants to be. And with scripted stuff, like that's what is so challenging nowadays, is like you don't get much rehearsal time, especially for stuff like that's really storyboarded out, like commercials. It's like you really need to rehearse, because like the whole thing is built on one facial expression that just needs to like pop like that. And it's just like I feel like it always just comes down to like getting everything to be moment by moment and just like letting it has a speed that it wants to be, and it's like it sort of falls into that, and then everything sort of unfolds from there.
Well, that's great. I love that. I think one of the ways we wanted to really open up the conversation about the technical as well is just talking about your relationships with DPs, because I know I've spoken with a few of your senior email responses come in prior to this in prep, which was like, I really rely on my DP, or I really work with my DP on the technical. And, as a TP, I love hearing that, because I'm like, yes, relationships, it's so fun. But can we talk a little bit about your relationships to your DP? There are some directors that want to call the lens swap on set, that don't let their DP do that. There's some, everyone has their own style of working with the DP. So, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to, can you talk a little bit about your relationship with your DPs and how you like to maybe work a little in prep and establishing the visual, and then how you want to execute that with your actors on set? You can also maybe throw in, do you like let your actors talk to your DP? Do you prefer that every note goes through you first? Because I've worked with, different directors who, some are on one side and some are on the other. So maybe a little bit about that.
Yeah. I work with almost like one DP now, like almost all the time. She's like my best friend. But we prep a lot. So the prep process for us, like if we start a project in this narrative, we start prepping before I know she's working on it, depending on the scale and scope of it. And we start prepping pretty early, and we're pretty detailed in that process. But when we're on set, we already know what we're doing. So my favorite pastime, and I always tell this to people, is allowing people to do their job. So it's like we've already gone through what this is. So we might have a quick moment of, do you think it's a 35 or do you want to swap? And I'm like, let's see it. Okay, cool. Do your thing. But I'm never at that point doing her job. But also, I don't really talk to my DP about the shot anymore on set. That's the time for the actors. We've already done that. So she's just auditioning things, and then we're having a quick dialogue, but we're not building or kind of doing anything. And if anything changes, she's the first person I'm talking to. Like, oh, we just blocking switched. I know our plan was this, but let's do this. Like, I'm a lot more available to like the other collaborators, especially the actors, because they need a lot more. So she'll give me notes and she'll come to me and she'll be like, I'm making this adjustment. But yeah, it's really not, we've spent so much time in every single scene. I've shared with her my blocking ideas, probably 1 to 2, maybe 3 ideas, depending on the scene. We've kind of really gone through it, so she's empowered with like a part of my brain already. So we're not really deciding too many other things on set.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, like, especially coming off the last question, like, I think I like to work with DPs. Like, I look for the same quality that I look for in actors, which I like people who listen and, like, listen to the material and don't just try and, like, force any one thing onto it. And I actually end up I do a lot of music video and I do a lot of, like, dancey kind of stuff. And it's not always, we don't have time to, like, choreograph or plan stuff out. So a lot of times, like, I need a DP who can, like, dance with my talent. And it makes such a huge difference when you have someone who can like look at what the performer's doing and respond to it in like an organic and interesting way. And I think like, I mean, also going off what you said, I had a mentor once say to me like, the secret to good directing is to like hire good people and get out of their way. And 100%. I feel like that's kind of my go-to strategy is like find people I trust and then like don't, like why would I tell them how to do their jobs? And yeah, I think it's that balance of like finding people who like I can talk through like about the like relationships or the feelings or like the kind of emotionality of the piece, but I'm not looking over their shoulder trying to like I'm like, oh, this is the lens we should be on this because like I don't know everything that they've dedicated their whole life to. Why would I try to like slot in there?
So I come at this from a different perspective,
Yeah.
for sure.
I can
Wait,
tell by
I'm
your
done.
face.
Yeah.
I was like, he was looking at me.
We've done all of it.
I have, and as part of my career path is to literally do all of it. But I settled on being a cinematographer for 10 years before I moved into directing. So I come at it from a little bit of a different perspective. But for me, again, we talked about Spielberg. Spielberg is a huge influence. And the way that he directs is very specific visually. So calling lenses is absolutely in my prerogative as a director to know exactly what that canvas is going to be and what that frame is going to be. And also, as much as I prep and as much as I plan, I am very much about showing up on set, watching the actors do what they do, and then discovering the way to tell the story within that moment. So I'm kind of the complete opposite of what you were talking about in that respect of I want to show up and I want to organically feel it and then discover exactly how to do that scene from there. But at the same time, both of you said hire the right people and let them do their jobs.
Yeah.
Even having come from the background of being a DP, I don't tell a DP what to do. I don't tell them how to light.
Right.
What I tell them what to do is to what my idea is and what my plan is.
Yeah.
And if they get in the weeds or they're not doing what I want,
Yeah.
Right.
then I have the vocabulary to tell them exactly
Yeah.
how to
And I
change
think-
that.
And I think we're almost saying the same thing. I don't know if you're actually even opposing anymore, because I imagine when I'm in that prep process, like he was saying, right, I'm sharing all this stuff. We're talking about lenses. I very much am like, hey, what does a 32 look like if this is this? What does this look like, right? And then on the day that, and it's funny because everyone knows, like I always ask for more time in blocking, and I always ask for a little bit more time because like once the camera gets up, then I know I'm sharing the space with everybody else. But the more I spend time, like you said, kind of seeing these things, then I think the rest of the flow kind of happens. Like on the day on the set, I think we pick up a lot more momentum. That kind of first half, I'm able to kind of block, be with the actors, kind of see this thing. And I usually bring my DP in before I bring anybody else in to look at it. And then it's those moments, right, where we're like, oh yeah, we thought this was we're gonna go this way, we're gonna go with this lens, it looks different. So I think the prep that you talked about does allow me to be that fluid and flexible, but I think it is, like you said, knowing like, hey, these are the things I'm trying to do, this is my intention. You also know the intention, so I've never experienced where I think a lot of first time an earlier director to be like, oh, me and my DP are trying to make 2 different movies.
Right.
I was like, how did you get to set?
Right.
How did you guys get to set? How could they offer you this solve to this thing if you guys both understand the same idea? So I think what you're saying is so true.
I think I'm even like farther on the other end of that spectrum than like the spectrum that you've set up. Like I think I'm like way out here, and that like prep for me is I like storyboarding everything just because I like drawing out the movie and I like knowing the edit and normally knowing how the music is going to play with the edit. And I've been a photographer for 15 years, and so like I go into it knowing every lens I want to shoot every shot on. But then I like to get to set and not open the storyboards because I've already memorized them and I already know the scenes, cuts that are going to happen. But I've worked with David Bolin, my DP, for like 10 years now, and he's shot probably 80% of my work. And so a big part of my style, I think, is doing something that actors hate a lot of the time, which is just soft rolling when they're not paying attention and getting moments when they're rehearsing and things like this. And that becomes like, for me, that becomes the most special part of filmmaking because that's where like editing becomes really fun. And so David is very much like deserving of co-director in a lot of senses because he knows that like I want him to be rolling even if I'm working on something else. If he sees something, he'll start shooting, and we've shot together so much that like he just knows how we work together, and like he knows how I would want to frame something, and I know how he moves and how he operates. And so a lot of the times, like the last project we shot together, we would set something up and like it would be a fairly long setup and the actors would be not having anything to do, and he'll just like have them run a scene and he'll just start rolling on a moment that he finds particularly beautiful. And it's like, to me, that's just like magic. And a lot of times like I won't even see those things until the edit, and like we'll get back to the boards and we'll start shooting stuff, and then it'll sort of unfold from there. But like always throughout the process, for me, it's like, can we just start rolling? And like my sound guy and my DP I've worked with forever, and like they just know if I look at them that we're just gonna roll, and everybody on set has to shut up. And it's like, it's the only moment on set where I start to feel really tense because like I'm like, please do not talk. And like everybody has to start to like feel that pattern happen where it's like the set is about the actors feeling like they live there and being able to just never really leave their comfort zone once they find that flow state. And it's like the cameras might be rolling and they might not be. We might be staging a shot. David might just be shooting something, but it's like once we're there, it's like everything is fair game. And that's like become probably the biggest single thing that
That's great.
Do you
people,
find
yeah,
actors that rebel against that at all?
yeah,
Yeah.
big time.
Can we
Big
talk
time.
about that? That's
Well-
interesting. So what happens when that happens?
I think it like, and to be fair, like my work definitely skews a lot more documentary. So they don't rebel in documentary because that is the purpose of documentaries. But with scripted stuff, it's like you have to trust the director and the DP a lot. Like if an actor who's not familiar with the DP directing them through a moment when they're like just out of makeup and the scene's not lit and he's like placed them somewhere, like you have to have a lot of trust because like that's going into the edit that might make it into the film. And like if you went into it knowing that this is the script you're shooting and now there's this like new moment, it's just sort of something that I always try and preface people that I'm working with like, this is how I work. Like you have to be ready to get a moment right when it happens. And it's like frankly become a really big bottleneck with me working with DPs is like, are they going to do that? Like, are you always looking for a moment, and are you going to roll on it, and are you going to be fussy if I tell you to roll on something that's not part of the script, and are you going to be mad if I like take the camera and shoot something in the moment just because it's there and we're on a location and something happens? And it's just like that organicness, I think, is sort of like my, threshold of how I want sets to work, and it does frustrate people for sure.
That's it.
Do you find yourself working with, on the scripted stuff, I mean, I guess it's commercial, so casting is in your hands, out of your hands a little, but do you find yourself, because of your style, working with similar actors or some of the same actors on projects because they understand your style?
Yeah, I 100% am gravitating towards people that I can already tell are just down to show up and have an exploration process on set. And that's the hardest thing with commercials is like sometimes an agency is going to be comfortable with that and they're going to like let you do your thing and be in the moment and deviate from the boards, and sometimes they're not. But I try and make that like really clear when I bid commercials too, of like my style comes from a documentary and a photography background, and like I'm here to get moments that you're probably not going to see, and they're going to be a 2.5 second clip in the edit that just has like a lot of life to it. And so I definitely sometimes when people come into those projects that are a bit more rigid and not used to that, it's like a bit of tension at first, and then they start to feel out the pace, and they're like, oh, this is going to play out a bit differently. But yeah.
So Ben touched on one of the hearts of the relationship between director and actors, which is trust. It's so important to have the absolute implicit trust of the actor to the director, and to make sure that the actor is out of their head and completely blindly trusting the director to make the decisions. And the reason why I ask that is because some actors would see that as a violation of trust, that, oh, wait, you're rolling when I'm not. So finding the right actors is key to that style, and there's nothing wrong with that style. I think it's beautiful. But if you don't have that trust of the actor, and if they're in their own head, then they're not going to be truthful in their performance. They're going to be analyzing themselves.
Yeah.
And,
And what's ironic is like stealing those moments to the actor is actually a reflection of them being great. Like that's like if the camera's rolling and they weren't expecting it, it's because they're just good. they're just they're in the moment.
I inherently wish they understood that, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm like I call cut late, and typically I tell the actors, depending on the scene, I'm like, you live here already. Like don't wait for action. Like once you guys are set, once you like, you can just kind of be and kind of live. Because I do want something at the head. I do want something at the tail. That might just be a reaction. It might just be a moment. A lot of my stuff is more narrative. I spent time doing documentaries, so that's where I saw all the stuff you described. I'm like, that's what makes, to me, filmmaking super magical. It's like these kind of moments and breaths in between. So with actors on set, you walk onto a set, you're like, okay, it's like a control thing, I think, for them, where it's like, okay, I want to make sure, like, I am kind of navigating what I have in my mind for this performance. But if you get me while my head is down before I've done this, or like I've already said my lines, like why hasn't he called cut yet? And it's like, because you're still living and breathing, and there's people in front of you, and you could keep talking if you wanted to. You could do a lot more. And I think those moments for me always find a way into the projects I'm working on, especially if the actors, like you said, are kind of dropped in and very much in the world. So I'm big on allowing the space to feel like once they get into the space like it's theirs. And people, like you said, people kind of naturally get quiet, especially if you know your collaborators. They're like, okay, even the DP knows, like, wait, are we? Yeah, just let them kind of move around the space. So I think a lot of that does kind of translate to narrative stuff. To hear you kind of say that is, yeah.
Sabrina, have you found that with kids a lot? Because I know with kids, there's a lot of stolen moments that.
Definitely. I think for me, I kind of am a mix of everyone, what you were saying, your relationships with your DPs are, especially working with children. We'll plan as much as possible and then abandon the plan on set. That's very much the same thing where I storyboard and I have it memorized by the time I go in, but I kind of feed off of people's energy, and then also just, for me, being an actor who's also a director, I know how much, going back to trust being important, that is, safety is an important thing. And I know in terms of, once I hire actors, the first thing I say to them, I'll do a call with them, or I'll sit down and have coffee with them. The first thing I'll say in preface is, I have a similar style where, I may in the moment think something's great, but I will never put you in harm's way. So I think working with children, it's making sure they understand that it's make-believe that they're playing, rather than, we came into this with a plan, this is the end of our story. Especially the stories I tell, it's not movies for kids. I'm putting kids in films that are catered to young adults and adults that are telling these kind of traumatic stories sometimes, but they don't know that. They only have the bits and pieces that they're in. So kind of allowing them to understand, we may be rolling right now because you're doing something really great with your eyes or something. I did a film last year called Along Came Sunday, which is about foster care and a little girl who's living with her stepmom in an abusive household. And having the little girl come in the first day, immediately she was kind of tense. And I was like, forget what I said about what scene we were starting with, skip to this scene where she's supposed to be watching her parents argue and covering her eyes. because she's so tense, shoot it now, go off of this right now. And we got that shot, and I remember being like, this is better than what I thought it was gonna be, you know? And it was kind of my first film where the lead actor is a kid, and diving into that. So I really did not know exactly how this was gonna go. And she became really comfortable with everyone on set very quickly. And throughout the day, it became more of a, I trust you, I'm going to do whatever you think is best, even if it wasn't something she had memorized. She was 7 years old at the time, and she completely came in with her lines memorized, and her mom would say, this is this scene, you know. But then there would be moments where she's just staring off in the distance, and I was like, oh, that's perfect for this. Or she would be playing during her time off and blowing bubbles, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's the perfect transition. So kind of go in there and get that. And I think that's kind of where I go with as far as abandon the plan when it comes to that stuff. And then in that same film, I'm very big on intimacy coordination. I have training in that. So for films where there's any, violence, stunts, things like that, I'm very big on rehearsal beforehand, sitting down with a stunt coordinator, sitting down with an intimacy coordinator. For me, I just recently got certification, so now I can do that and bring that to my sets. But in that same film with the adults there's a slap, and I was ready to, have the actors, and my DP was ready to do it. Let's do it from an angle. No one needs to actually slap anyone in this, The actors were pretty set on, we trust each other, we've done the rehearsal, we've done the work, and we want to take it to that level. And I was like, this is my first situation like this, and my instinct is no. And they pulled me aside to be like, we trust you, you trust us, we need you to trust us. We can do this, and it's not going to be an issue. So we ran the stunts, we ran the whole coordination and everything, went into it. I said, we're doing it once, one angle, one take, that's it. And we got it. And they really had that trust in everyone on set, in themselves. And, the little girl wasn't present for that scene. She's off doing something else. She comes back in, and she could tell, the energy has changed in the room. So she said, I want to do this scene, where it was a scene where she's more upset after watching them argue. And I was like, I don't know about that. We're kind of prepped for this next scene. And I kind of sat down with her and explained to her, you're playing make-believe and everything. Don't allow anyone's energy to affect you. And kind of had to preface, this is a film and, it's not real. And immediately she was like, yeah, I understand that. Okay. And she kind of was like, I want to do jumping jacks. Let's do jumping jacks. So I'm doing jumping jacks with her. And my DP was the same thing of you need a DP who can dance with your talent. For me, I need a DP who can, read the room and be like, all right, let's jump into this. So my DP comes in and is like, yeah, let's do jumping jacks. He's like, Sabrina, move out of frame. I'm gonna get this. I'm like, all right, let's roll. Let's get it. And just little moments like that. So I think for me, it's very abandon the plan, but also keep the plan in mind. So have it in the back of my head. Yeah. And, the film is very, I think with drama, like you were saying with horror, it's kind of similar where it's really, a lot of it is in the edit for everything. So for me, that's kind of my whole situation with DPs, and I really trust the DP that I work with. So kind of building that relationship through the years has been something that's really important to me, and I agree with needing to be able to look at my DP and he knows okay, let me get this right now, or he just understands that. And that's what I look for with relationships with DPs, and
nice.
Being able to kind of still keep the plan in mind.
Going back to what you were talking about with the actors that pulled you aside,
Mm-hmm.
we wanted to talk a little bit about working with newer versus seasoned actors and what you see the biggest differences on set are.
I think the biggest thing that I notice is agency. I think seasoned actors will ask for a take, like ask for another take, or kind of know, like, we're really collaborating. So I think I felt it with the seasoned actor I've worked with. It's like, oh, your take one is you also figuring out, and you might need another one because you're also working on kind of a better understanding what it is that the scene needs or what this relationship is. Where I think a lot of more inexperienced actors are like, they've been home, they think they've got it, and they're just gonna try to, kind of beat a dead horse, or kind of, there's not really a collaboration. It doesn't matter what their scene partner does to them sometimes, right? And they're afraid to ask for like another take. I remember I shot a film, and my lead is, a younger actor, and we shot it for like 6 days, and I remember he called me like some months later, and he was like, man, you were the first director I worked with who made me feel like I was collaborating. He'd worked on TV shows, he had been in, other things. He was like, it was like you gave me permission to like ask for the things I needed, but also like I would come into a scene and I would like have ideas, and I was like trying to flesh them out, and you gave me the space to do that. And I think even for, younger, inexperienced actors, like you have that, right? It might, if you're a guest star or a co-star in an episode of TV, you don't. But I think if you're working on a narrative and you have space, like, yeah, you can ask, trust the director, but if he's like, hey, I need one more, like, I'm gonna always give an actor one more if they ask for one more. Because I know I'm gonna get something that I can use, especially if they're doing the work and I'm like, oh yeah, we're aligned. I know I'm gonna get something good. And I think they don't know the agency they have in the collaboration. I think that's the biggest thing.
And like building off that, I think seasoned actors also understand the machine of making a film. They know when to ask for another take, and they know like when maybe we should move on, because and it comes from like the respect of everyone's time.
Yeah.
Because there's so many people that are here, pushing into lunch. Like that's something I've never seen a seasoned actor do, because they know that everyone around them is going to make their acting look the best that it can. And I find the ones that are newer don't choose their moments for agency with quite the same poise. And I think that comes with just experience in how a film comes together to be made.
Yeah. Riding off of that, I think seasoned actors kind of have a way of understanding the technical camera side, where I can kind of just say, this is a wide, and I know they're going to give me the movement that I need in that wide, and I don't have to kind of be like, you're very stiff right now, or, maybe try this, da da da. They understand immediately how big they can go, and I think that's something that, whether or not actors kind of recognize it or not, especially with the lack of acting for camera classes, is actors are kind of, if you're a trained actor, you're trained for stage primarily. So kind of reminding them to newer actors, you have to kind of remind them all the time, this isn't stage, and sometimes less is more in those close-up shots. And you can say, we're going to a close, and they understand now they're speaking with their eyes. And I think even especially me doing drama, I'll notice seasoned actors will save the tears for that close, whereas they know in the wide they'll get to that place, but they don't allow anything to fall. They don't do too much. They can easily snap out of it. They're not fully there. And then once we go in on that close or that tight shot, they're like, yeah, here it is.
And I like when they communicate that to me too. Like beforehand, I've had actors that are like, okay, if we're doing the wide first, I'm not going to cry until we get to the close, because I don't want to use up that emotion right now, but I'll give everything up until that moment. And I appreciate that, because I'm going to want that to be better in a closer shot. So it makes us feel like we're on the same team, we're collaborating.
Exactly. I love that type of conversation.
I've also had actors tell me, like, this is going to be the take. Like, especially for heavier scenes, they're like this is going to be it. You're not, like, this, there isn't going to be
How
another
often
one.
are they right, though?
Always. Almost always. Like, especially if the rehearsal's good.
Right.
Because if you've done it, especially if you've done 3 takes or 4 takes, and it's like, if you're still trying to find it, which I feel like is really where scenes come to life, is when you're finding it while you're shooting. You're not totally finding it in rehearsal. You're getting 70% there, and then you're like getting it on set.
Agreed.
But one thing that stood out to me is like seasoned actors, when you have to give them a verbal cue to like within a shot, you have to cue a movement or something like this, they can take that cue and not let it disturb their flow, so they can still live through the scene and then hit their like dolly cue when the shot's going to push in, and then they have to like exit on a very specific point for the edit. Like they can take that and just wrap that into their emotion, as opposed to like that mark being, you know, like something that totally throws them off and disturbs their flow.
Yeah,
You know?
that's, I think, I typically don't want to give an actor more than 1.5 notes, but I think with seasoned actors, you can kind of have that. They can kind of sense what's going on. It's like, oh wait, so you needed to do that when this thing comes. All right, cool, got you. I love when I'm like about to go to an actor, like, yeah, the thing, yup, cool. And I'm like,
That's fun.
because then I
That's
know
fun
where,
to
you know,
witness.
and I think that's super important. I think, once again, that kind of, we're in conversation the moment they show up on set. And also you can tell how they greet the crew and certain things. Like, and everyone's personalities are different, but how they kind of consume the space. You're like, oh yeah, we're making a thing today. It's not like we're like kind of, you know, tiptoeing around you, or we're all kind of, you know, doing this together.
I think something no one's touching on is like there are also a ton of seasoned actors who are like awful to work with. And like,
Yeah.
Now, what kind of discussion is this?
well, I mean, like when people become really uncomfortable to work with, it's like the collaboration is breaking down on the other end of it. Like collaboration can be not working on the beginner side, and it can also be not working because someone is like just unwilling to be collaborative or to have conversation. And like as a director, like that, still being able to mitigate those dynamics is important. You're not going to recast something once you're already rolling. You have to be able to like zoom in to know like the story only happens while the cameras are rolling in the shot, and it's like get what you need in the shot and then put the, you know, move on from that. But sometimes like that figuring out personalities can be really challenging, especially when there's a really technical thing, or there's a really exhausting shot, or there's running or stunts, or it's cold. That can be
cold.
Really frustrating, and like some actors would be like, I'm not fucking doing 5 takes.
Yeah.
Like,
You bring up a good point. This is, ultimately, we're discussing this for actors. And for young, unseasoned actors to know what they're getting themselves into.
Cold.
And the interesting thing is, I'm just listening to everyone, and I liken our job as a filmmaker, whether it be as a DP or a director or whatever. We're jazz musicians in a session, and we all play our instrument, and we're all sort of like, I think of Thelonious Monk as a great example of a musician who knows exactly what he wants. He surrounds himself with the musicians that he wants to play with, but he lets everyone have their solo. And, you know, the actor's solo is at that moment when everyone's done all their work and we're ready to go. There's a lot of pressure on them. And our job as filmmakers, I really think, is to provide, as you say, a safe space for them to not feel that pressure of the time, of the sun, of all the things that we have to deal with. You mentioned seasoned actors or new actors. That's actually my actor friend calling me. No. It's one of those things, you know. And I know you have as well, and many of you either have or will soon work. There's a difference between a seasoned actor, a new, inexperienced actor, and a celebrity. And all three of these things are gargantuanly different.
Yes.
And all three have a cavalcade of issues.
Yes.
And directors have to navigate that in a way to keep the jazz playing.
Yeah.
And I know for me, and just listening to what all you guys have to say, it's a great insight because we all have the same struggles. A new young actor that's watching this, the biggest takeaway from this particular question, I think, is be prepared for all of it, but don't let all of it interfere with what you want to do as an actor. That's the most important thing. You're going to be cold. You're going to be tired. Lunch is going to come.
Yeah.
There's going to be stress. The DP is going to have an issue with this. The director's going to have an issue with that. The producer's going to say something that's going to piss off the director. It's all this little world that we create for that moment, and it is a huge distraction for an actor.
Yeah.
And our job is to do everything we can to create a safety net so that they can have that moment without all of that external force. That's tough.
To me, it boils down to asking questions. Like, be comfortable asking questions.
Sure.
Become personal with the DP. Become personal with the director. And like, if you are feeling some way about something, do a sidebar.
But actors don't often know that. You have to give them permission to do that.
Exactly.
And it's scary because there's two different permissions. There's permission to be a performer, and there's permission to be vulnerable as a person who's trying to perform.
Yep.
And you have to differentiate that space, because, you know, there's a freedom as you're a DP director, I'm an actor director, and as you are as well. So there's a whole side of this as an actor to feel not only safe within the confines of that moment that you're there to produce, but also outside of that moment to also have the vulnerability in the moment to not be judged for your question, and not to have the grip who's like holding the flag like, oh, again, you know, there's all these external forces, and a director, a good director, a solid director. I worked with a director as an actor, Joe Dante. It was chaos. There was all kinds of things happening. We were losing the light. I was a young man. I was so stoked to be there, and he was amazing at making sure that us, little group of actors that were about to get this shot off, were safe from that. And that is a really hard thing to do, because as a director, you're not impervious to this nightmare. In fact, you're at the helm of it, and so you're the most fired at member of this set, yet you need to go and communicate that with your actors. Say, oh, don't worry about it, now the bullets are bouncing right off the bat, you're fine.